Stop scrolling. This isn't about budget cuts. This is about a massacre. The true reason we abandoned the moon. In December 1972, the final Apollo crew discovered a scene of slaughter. The shattered remains of a Soviet lander, its cosmonauts ripped apart by an unknown force. This wasn't a technical failure. This was violence. And as the American crew was forced to wait hours on the lunar surface, they watched. They saw the shadowy figures approaching their own module. This isn't a theory. This is the last known combat report from the moon, and it explains why every nation on Earth has been too terrified to go back.
Please subscribe my channel and enjoy the stories.
The National Parks of North America. Places of staggering, unforgettable beauty. From the geothermal wonders of Yellowstone to the granite majesty of Yosemite. From the ancient, towering spires of the Canadian Rockies to the endless, silent plains that stretch to the horizon. Millions flock here yearly, seeking solace, adventure, the untouched. But what if that untouched quality is a carefully maintained facade? Because amongst this spectacular wilderness lies a sinister truth that the authorities seem pathologically reluctant to address. For centuries, they've been vanishing. Hikers, hunters, experienced rangers, people who know the terrain better than anyone. We call it the nation's silent mass disaster. The hard truth is, the exact number of the lost is unknown, because until recently, the U.S. National Park Service hadn't even bothered to compile a comprehensive database on its missing persons. Think about that. In environments designed to protect us, disappearances were treated as isolated incidents, not a pattern. The criminologist who saw the pattern. A former police officer turned author, we'll call him the investigator, stumbled upon this horrifying anomaly. After cataloging over 1,000 bizarre vanishings, cases where all rational explanation fails, he concluded that these incidents don't happen randomly. They cluster. They gravitate toward the edges of protected wilderness areas, especially around the vast, deep waters of the Great Lakes and the impenetrable centers of the great parks. He systematically filtered out the noise. No suicide, no confirmed foul play, no obvious animal attack, no drowning. What remained was a chilling residue. Cases where experienced outdoorsmen vanish from terrain they know intimately. The investigator believes there is an unknown quantity behind these events, something intelligent, something patient, and above all, something predatory and unseen. Case file: The Boy Who Played Hide and Seek. We start with perhaps the most famous and most heartbreaking example of a clean sweep. Dennis Martin, July 14, 1969, in the Great Smoky Mountains. Dennis, just 6 years old, was playing hide-and-seek with his brother and friends near Spence Field. He ran toward a thicket bordering the dense woodland, and that was the last anyone ever saw of him. 1,500 searchers, helicopters, and even a crack team of Green Berets, personnel usually reserved for national security crises, swept 56 square miles. Nothing. Not a trace. But an hour after Dennis vanished, a nearby family heard an almighty scream from Rowan's Creek. They saw something horrifying, a shape described as a bear crossed with a man, carrying a small child over its shoulder, scurrying into the dense forest. The FBI dismissed it. Too far, too fast. But a ranger on the search team later hiked that exact route himself. He made it in just over an hour. The terrain was navigable, but the thing that took Dennis was not human. He didn't get lost. He was taken. The frozen pose and the missing feet. The environmental factors in these cases often defy logic. Consider Charles McCulloch, a 19-year-old photographer in Crater Lake National Park, January 1975. He went out for 2 days. Search efforts failed. A year later, hikers found his backpack 12 miles off-trail. Then they found McCulloch's body, or what remained of it, in a configuration that screams impossible physics. His jeans, unbuttoned, sitting on a log, frozen in position, as if an invisible man was sitting inside them. His socks were sticking out the bottom, and inside them, small foot bones. 12 feet away was the top of his skull. The rest of his body? Gone. Here's the trap. On the day he vanished, there were 7.5 feet of new snow on the ground. It was impossible to travel that area even with specialized transport. So how did a fully clothed man end up perfectly posed, stripped of his torso and limbs, in a location untouched by snow? The silent abduction of the lookout. This isn't limited to hikers. Those watching the wilderness are also taken. In August 2006, Stephanie Stewart, a 70-year-old wildfire spotter, was working alone at the Athabasca Lookout Tower in Jasper National Park, Alberta, Canada. On the morning when another spotter arrived, the tower was empty. The only missing item? Her blanket. The stove was lit, water boiled away to nothing. Her truck was parked outside, no forced entry, no struggle, no tracks leading in or out that didn't belong to her own vehicle. She was sound of mind, loved by her family. It was as if the air itself had peeled her out of her bed and carried her away without disturbing a single drop of water or a grain of dust. This single event forced the provincial government to rewrite safety protocols for every lookout tower in the region. The dissection of the outdoorsman. The perpetrators, if they are predatory, are intelligent enough to avoid simple explanations. Look at Bart Slyer in the Yukon, 2004. A master outdoorsman dropped off alone for a 3-week moose hunt. When the pilot returned, Bart's well-stocked camp was undisturbed. No raided supplies, no signs of struggle, no disturbed ground that would indicate a fight with a predator. Yet a search team found shards of bone and a few teeth 60 feet from his camp. Nearby, his hunting bow was propped against a tree and his dry bag was indented as if someone had just been sitting on it. Bears and wolves were ruled out by scat analysis. If a predator killed him, why leave the food? Why carefully prop up his bow? And most crucially, why did they leave only teeth and bone fragments, suggesting a deliberate, surgical dissection rather than a messy consumption? The unnatural stop. The pattern repeats itself even when victims are tethered together, as in the terrifying case of Eric Lewis on Mount Rainier in 2010. Eric, Lane, and Storm were roped together, ascending Rainier. At 14,000 feet, the lead climber waited. He was joined by Lane. Eric never arrived. When they reeled in the rope, he wasn't attached to the end. They had seen him moments before. His tracks simply stopped in the middle of nowhere. Search and rescue found his harness and shovel at a lower elevation, but Eric himself vaporized. What force can undo a climbing knot, erase the person, and leave the gear behind? Common threads of the vanished, the unsettling uniformity. When the investigator looked past the landscapes and focused only on the missing details, the horror became uniform. The footwear anomaly. In cases where a body is partially recovered, the victim is often undressed or their shoes or boots are completely missing. Look at McCulloch again. His socks, frozen on the ground, contained foot bones, but the boots were gone. Why discard the footwear, the primary defense against the terrain? The upside-down evidence. Christopher Tompkins vanished in 2002 in Georgia. Later, one work boot and trouser fibers were found snagged on barbed wire near the road. Months later, the other boot was found 900 yards away near a swamp. The contents of his pockets, pennies, and coins were neatly laid out on the road where he was last seen. This suggests he was inverted, shaken until his pockets emptied, and then the elements took the rest. The low BAC drowning. Todd Geeb vanished in Michigan in 2005 after he said, "I'm in a field." Weeks later, his body was found in a lake miles in the opposite direction he was walking. Officially, he drowned while intoxicated, but his autopsy showed no water in his lungs and his blood alcohol level was relatively low. He was pronounced drowned, yet he didn't drown. These are not the messy trails of the lost or the eaten. These are the surgical removals of the encountered. When rational explanations, serial killers, drug trade, simple exposure, fail to account for the no trace of struggle and the missing extremities, we are forced to look at the supernatural suggested by witnesses. Cryptids, Bigfoot or Dogman. Plausible for some disappearances, but they don't explain the precise removal of clothes or the non-animalistic wreckage of the spacecraft mentioned in the space conspiracy. Interdimensional portals, a popular theory, suggesting the terrain itself opens up. This aligns perfectly with the phenomenon known as the silence. Countless hikers report it, the sudden, absolute cessation of all wildlife noise. The wind stops rustling leaves, the air feels heavy, suffocating. People report an overwhelming, paralyzing feeling of being stalked by something unseen. Jan McCabe, wife of a physicist, experienced this while bow hunting in 2010. Everything went quiet. Then she saw a distortion moving through the branches, a humanoid, cloaked, appearing to warp the light around it. She managed one photo before the sounds of nature rushed back in. What if the parks aren't hiding predators? What if they are hiding terrors in reality? Locations where something else can observe, select, and remove us without leaving a single footprint behind. We urge you, if you enter the wild, be prepared, be vigilant, because when the birds stop singing, you'll know the hunt has begun.